Thank you, Shihao, for joining us. For those of you who don't know Shihao is a Flutter engineer, but it's like a software developer in the Flutter team in Google. So, welcome,
Mhm.
Shihao, to this interview.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. So, I guess like a lot of people would love to know how you get into Google. But before we touch on that topic, right, I've done a little bit of digging into your LinkedIn profile specifically. So, can you share a bit about what is your background? Like specifically, what do you study during your college or your university days?
Yeah, so it could be a long story, but let me try and cut it short a bit.
No
So when I
worries.
first started in uni, like undergrad, I was studying biomedical engineering. And that's because in high school, I realized I really like biology and chemistry. And then one of the reasons why I made a switch to computer science is because one, it was really hard to find a job in biomedical engineering,
Mm.
at least as an international student in the US.
Right.
And two, like I actually realized I really like coding from the few classes I took in the US, like the few programming classes, because
Mm.
we had to write simple scripts using stuff like MATLAB, and then so I took some extra classes like web dev,
Mm.
like a C++ class, and I was thinking like, oh, this is actually quite cool as well. And I was thinking about switching my major, but it was at that time it was my second or third year into uni,
Mm-hmm.
so it would have been a difficult transition. Like it would have entailed like another year or two in uni, and then it's like quite a big shift lah. And so one of the things one of my family members and some friends talked about was like, oh, there's this idea of a coding bootcamp. And basically these are like really short-term programs, like usually 3 to 4 months. Um, but they are very intense. So for example, my program that I did was 6 days a week, 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. was mandatory, and then most people usually stayed longer. So I heard about this kind of program, and then I saw that their outcomes were quite good. And personally, I was like, okay, like this is an easier, like cheaper investment, and like it seems like the outcomes are fairly good. So I will give this a shot because I didn't want to spend so much time and money just to like switch degrees. And after doing, so I graduated from uni, did that program, and then I did a contracting job as a software test engineer. And then after that, I went back to the same coding bootcamp actually to teach there for a year as a full-time instructor. And then from there, I bounced to Google, and I've been there since.
Right, that's pretty cool. And I think we have something similar in terms of how we transition to tech. So I actually went through a bootcamp as well. I was learning like psychology.
Oh,
Yeah. And then after that, I guess like in Singapore, the psychology sector is pretty small. And I'm competing against a lot of people who are interested in psychology. And I guess I found this article where it says if you go through this programming bootcamp, you can earn yourself a role as a software developer. So I was like, how much does a software developer earns? And then once I saw the number, immediately I quit. My back then I was learning psychology part time. And the thing is, like for your bootcamp, it's 6 days a week. That's a little bit intense. And what were you learning back then? Was it web dev or in the bootcamp?
yeah, it's full stack web dev. So basically, you learn JavaScript for the front end and the back end. You learn Node.js for the back end, and the program taught three different like front end frameworks. I think we learned Backbone, React, and Angular.
Wow. Wow, that's a lot. And how long is the programming bootcamp? Is it 3 months or 6 months?
Mine was 3 months, so it was 3 months, 6 days a week.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, during my bootcamp, I was learning Ruby on Rails. I guess the reason why they chose Ruby is because it's an easier language to study. But for your bootcamp, it's a little bit more intense. So 6 days a week, and then you're learning three different front end frameworks, which is Backbone, React, and then Angular. And I think for a beginner like ourselves back then, I think it's pretty hard to well, how was your experience through the boot camp? Was it like difficult? Was it a smooth journey? How was it?
It was quite difficult, to be honest, because I did it. It's a very interesting time for me because I graduated from uni on a Friday, and then I
Mm.
started that boot camp the Monday following. So
Oh
I
my.
basically packed up all my things from LA, And then like we drove up to San Francisco, and then I moved in over the weekend, and then we started on that Monday. So
Ah.
for me, it was tough because I didn't have time to transition. And the thing about the bootcamp is, even though it's 3 months, there is like an entry exam. So basically, they want to make
Mm.
sure you understand JavaScript to a certain degree, like how to handle objects, like how you can like make for loops with like simple operations, basically. And then there's what they call pre-course, which is basically like, oh, there's like a few weeks of like self-paced introductory material that won't take as much time as the actual bootcamp. And so like my time spent on that pre-course material was like quite limited because I had to do finals. I graduated, so my parents were here.
Mm.
So and then I had to
Ah.
move. So that part was quite difficult because when I first started, like I kind of like I had to put in a lot more time to catch up on things.
Mm.
So I feel like given if that wasn't a factor, it would have been easier, but it definitely wasn't easy either. One of the interesting things about the bootcamp is like they focus a lot on like learning how to learn. So
Mm.
they don't give you all the information you need. They just basically say, "Hey, this is the kind of thing this is the project you're gonna build." Like, let's say it was the React sprint. They say, "Okay, you're gonna build like a simple YouTube clone using React." This will give you a very basic intro to React, and then you have to figure out everything else out yourself by either looking at
Wow.
the docs or based on
Okay.
that introductory material that we've already given you. And you can ask the TAs for help or the instructor for help, but they usually start off with, "What have you tried?" And then if you don't have an
Ah.
answer, they say, well, try something first. I'll come back later.
Right. Wow.
And the reason for that being, yeah, then the reason for that being is, and this is one thing that I thought was like really important to learn as well, is that in software, the programming language and the framework and everything you learn is always changing, right? For example, like I learned JavaScript in the program, but then right
Mm-hmm.
now, because I write Flutter code, I had to learn Dart Flutter, a
Yeah.
completely new framework. And I'm sure you've had to do the same thing to learn Flutter,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So they focus on that and they emphasize that, right? Like if you don't know how to find the answer, like just by, like how, like basically, how do you find the answer? Like what kind of
Mm.
method of logical deduction do you have? Like, oh, like did I try Stack Overflow? When I check Stack Overflow, how did I search? Did I just copy paste something and don't really understand what happened? Or like, what did I do? Did I think about the answer? Did I think about whether that logically makes sense? Are there side
Right.
effects to the code I just copy pasted?
Mm.
And that was the biggest takeaway for me. Like I think shifting gears to think that way was a bit difficult because I feel like in school a lot of the time the answers are already predefined, and you have to kind of in this situation they forced you to like try something first even if it's
Mm.
wrong. And like then they ask you, oh, why did you do that? And then they can correct not the answer but the way you got to the answer. Like, oh, like maybe the way you got to the answer, you had like some misunderstanding of some like programming concept here or there, or like maybe you looked at Stack Overflow and then you copy pasted but you didn't think about why it worked, but then it caused some side effect down the road that you didn't anticipate.
Yeah, thanks for putting it out of the way that your bootcamp have actually taught you. Because I feel that, I guess for my bootcamp, it's exactly the opposite. It's a lot of like asking my TAs or my instructors like, how do I do this? How do I do that? And then they are really very nice people. They will just like give the answer straight away. But for your bootcamp, I think it's more towards like questioning on what exactly you have done and also questioning how you have done it. Which I think it's a hard way, like you said earlier, it's hard for you to go into that mindset where you have to like find out the answer and why and how you do it, right? Rather than spoon feeding you the answer. And then this develops like dependent on the TAs and instructor, which I did. Which I think wasn't very helpful towards my learning. But I guess over the years of developing, I realized I have to be independent, right? Do you think that that skill that you have learned during your bootcamp have made an impact or have made who you are as a developer when you have graduated from the bootcamp and as of right now as a software developer?
100%, because like I said, I work on the Flutter team, and then basically I had to learn a new language and a new framework on my own. I mean, of course, I had help from my team, right? But like a lot of the stuff, like
Hmm.
sometimes they're busy, and you can't really like you try to get things done on your own before you bother anyone else. I definitely think it was very helpful, and it helped me not to be afraid of like new ideas, right? Like I definitely was still afraid when I first joined. I was like, oh my gosh, I have to learn a new language and a new framework.
Hmm.
But then I kind of use this like kind of principles of like, okay, I can just learn this by myself. there are a lot of documentation about Dart, about Flutter. I can like get a head start on things before I join the team. So that's actually what I did, right? Like I found out when I first like signed to join, I spent some time on my own learning Dart and Flutter before I started, so that when I on day one, like I wouldn't go in completely blind.
Right. So after that boot camp, you were then had a job as a, I guess, like testing software engineer. Is that right?
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Then,
So I had a 4 or 5 month contract. Yeah.
mm-hmm.
Sorry.
It's okay. Then you went back to your boot camp to help out as a assistant. Is that right?
In the bootcamp calls it a tech mentor, but basically
Right.
it's like a full-time instruction role. So basically,
Mm.
my role is to basically guide a cohort. So the program is split into two sections: the first half and the second half. So sometimes I see a one cohort through the first half, sometimes through just the second half, and sometimes through the whole thing. So
Mm.
basically my role is to like kind of tailor the content to be more adjusted to the group, because every cohort has like different strengths and weaknesses based on like the different students involved, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes some students might find Angular like really difficult to wrap their heads around. And so like one of the things I might do is like have smaller workshops of 3 to 4 people to cover those concepts if those people are weaker in the concepts. But then sometimes the entire class struggled with React or something similar. So then I have to do a full class like workshop, maybe at like 7 o'clock, or maybe after the program officially ends, for anyone who wants to come by and like listen in.
Mm.
Yeah. So like that's mostly my role, like, like trying to figure out how students are doing at different parts of the program, trying to see if there are ways I can push them beyond what they're already doing. As like, for example, the better students who, I mean, not to say better, so some are better than others at different things, right? But then
Yeah.
like, let's say the people who are doing well at React, like how do we push them to like learn even more and not be bored of what they're
Mm.
doing?
Yeah.
And then for the weaker students, how do we like get them to the level that we want them to be at?
Right. So I think you have seen the various, I guess, different types of students, right, through the boot camp. So what makes someone who is able to go through the boot camp? Because I guess from your experience, do you have people drop out from the boot camp?
Yeah, it does happen
Right.
at various parts of the boot camp. So we actually have what we call at the time, I don't know what they call it now, maybe it's the same thing. We have something called a mulligan, which means like in the first week when you realize, oh, this is way too much for me, whether like the program doesn't fit in terms of like the scheduling, or like this is just incredibly hard. Um, Basically, like people can go free. Like they leave and then they just leave their deposit and then they get a full refund basically.
Oh,
So
that's
that's
nice.
one time when so that's one time when people usually leave. Another time is during the mid section. There's a midterm assessment, basically just to make sure that they are able to grasp all the core concepts. So the first section of the bootcamp is like learning the fundamentals of like, I can write UI with the front end framework. I can do it in like CSS, HTML. I understand how to make it talk to a backend and write my own server and database. That's usually like kind of like the goal. And the second half is all projects. So the midterm assessment is basically just making sure, oh, can I do those basic things? Because if you can't, right, then the second half is kind of meaningless, right?
Right.
Because then you're just building a project, but you have no idea what's going on.
Right. Yeah. Right. Okay. So with that said, what is the most important knowledge or concept do you think that's very important as a software developer? Meaning that, do you think fundamentals very, very important? Do you think that the understanding of OOP, object-oriented programming, or do you think that like going through different frameworks, like for example, all of these front-end frameworks is important due to being adaptable? So what do you think is like, should I don't know, should I scope into one skill, or like I think you can suggest different like skills that you think it's important to master? Because I myself went through the boot camp, and I've seen some flaws, because I understand a boot camp from the word it's intense, so you have to learn a lot of things at that short amount of time. So one thing I realized is that fundamentals is very important, because I guess if your fundamentals is not the strongest, like for example, I didn't exactly know what object oriented programming is, or like I didn't have like a very good concept about it. I realized that when learning frameworks or even Flutter itself, because so OOP, then I realized that, oh, that's one of my weakness, even after working as a software developer, that kind of thing. So what are the different skills you think is very important as a software developer that they have to like be very good at?
It's hard because the first thing that comes to mind for me is not actually like a very technical skill, but more like two kind of soft skills that kind of touch, like kind of like intersect. So the first thing being like being curious and not lying to yourself, right? So
Mm.
like in the bootcamp experience or even in school, when someone asks you, oh, what's a deadlock? Or like, oh, do you understand object-oriented programming? And then let's say you memorize the answer from the textbook, but you don't really understand what it means. Then that's
Mm.
when you go into work and then you're too afraid to say, oh, I don't really understand what this means, right? Because it might feel a bit like scary to say, oh, I don't really understand OOP to it when you're already in a developer role, right?
Yeah.
So one thing is to just like, don't be afraid to not understand something and just ask when you don't understand.
Mm.
But the other thing is, so this ties into the second thing I want to say is like the soft skill of being able to ask like a technical question and not lose your like whether your teacher or your audience or even your classmates, right? Like when you ask them the question, try to be as specific as possible because a lot of the concepts you learn can be very complex. But
Yeah.
then the person who's listening to you may not understand what you already know and what you don't really understand.
Mm.
So let's say you don't understand the difference between OOP and declarative, like programming, right? Like how do you phrase the question? Like how do you say, oh, like I don't understand this part of OOP. Like I know you like have to like write classes this way. Like I understand subclassing as this and I understand superclassing as this, but then I don't really understand, why we do something like that. Or like, whatever the question may be, but then kind of giving them context to what you don't understand, what you think you understand. Because you might think you understand something, right? But then
Mm.
let's say I explain superclasses and then I described it as a subclass. Then the person listening might be like, wait, isn't that a superclass? And then you're like, oh, that makes a lot more sense, right? Like
Yeah.
yeah, so like it's just this ability to communicate what you do and do not understand. That's really important. But the second bit being like, oh yeah, like not kidding yourself into thinking you actually understand something when you're actually not sure.
Right. Okay. So that took a twist. I mean, yeah. You
Yeah,
said
I'm
about
sorry.
no, it's okay. It's okay. Because I think people have different perspective on what is important as being a developer themselves, right? So the two things that you pointed out is like being honest on what you know, and at the same time, like questioning yourself whether you actually know what you know, and make it simplified for people to understand. Because I believe like jargons are our best friends in terms of like programmers, right? Or we're gonna throw this like or superclass. I have no idea what's a superclass, honestly, or a subclass. I probably need to just Google it. But I do get it because like especially as a student without any programming experience, if you were to tell a student or if a student were to ask you a question and you can't explain it to a beginner, that's where I feel that you still have like a lack of knowledge on how you can convert this abstract or difficult concept into something simple, right? So I think that's one. And another thing, being honest, like I do agree. And I guess as developers, we have this imposter syndrome, right? Because like, oh my God, I'm in a developer role, but I don't know how to do an API call, which I actually had happened before. So so the thing is, yeah, I guess like being honest rather than being in the dark and not actually asking people around what is superclass will actually help you. So I think that's a good thing, because sometimes I do feel that I'm not worthy of, for example, being a Google developer expert. I don't know if I'm an expert in Flutter or not, but they chose me for a reason, and hopefully I don't disappoint them. I think in any role that we are, like, okay, you chose me, so I hope you don't get disappointed with the results that I give you and whatnot. Okay, so then transitioning from being working in a boot camp and being a software developer in Google, how do you make that transition? Do you go speak in meetups, or was it by chance, or someone in LinkedIn message you? How did it happen?
Oh man. So it's very interesting, right? Because my experience is a little bit more unusual.
Hmm.
I already had planned to like do the job search at some certain point when after I was an instructor because I needed a work visa to stay in the US. And so then my bootcamp couldn't sponsor me for a visa. So then I was already thinking about, okay, I'm gonna start applying for jobs by a certain time of the year. And then I got a LinkedIn message from a recruiter asking, oh, like, you seem like you might be a good fit, blah, blah, blah. Like, would you like to interview with Google? And the first time I saw it, I honestly thought it was spam because I was like, oh, like, how could this be? Like, so like a Google recruiter reaching out to me on LinkedIn, and like I don't have a CS degree, like you mentioned, and like I had bootcamp experience. And so like I kind of ignored it at first because I wasn't looking for it. I'm not at the time I wasn't trying to apply yet. And then I got a follow-up message saying, oh, like, I reached out to you last time, like, are you still available? And then I was thinking, oh wow, this might be real. And then like I looked into her LinkedIn and I saw, oh, she is a recruiter at Google. So then I said like, oh yeah, like I'm interested. Like we chatted for a bit and then she said, okay, let's set up an interview for you for 3-4 weeks down the line. And then I actually panicked a little bit because I hadn't been preparing yet. Like
Right.
I just, like I said, I didn't plan to job search until later on. And so I had to like kind of like put together a plan. Okay, 3-4 weeks. Like, how do I prepare? So the good thing about Google is that when you do get an interview, the recruiter and the HR team will actually send you a lot of information about like, oh, what can you expect? Like how long
Mm,
it'll be, what the format of the interview is going to be like. So there's actually not a lot of surprise in the format. But then the main emphasis becomes like the technical questions that you're
right.
asked, and then now we have a behavioral interview as well for the onsite.
Mm,
Yeah.
right.
So then I had the 2 weeks, 3 weeks to prepare. So based on that information, like I just like figure out when I had free time to like prepare, and then that's essentially how it happened for me. But
Mm.
that granted, that is a very unusual way for me to get the interview, and I didn't expect that at all. I'm sure most of the time it's not like that.
So you got scouted by people in Google, or a Google recruiter actually scouted you in a sense, that headhunted you. So I guess like pretty similar to how I got my first Flutter job in LinkedIn as well. Some random person just messaged me because I put Flutter in my bio, and back then Flutter wasn't very popular. So because I was also looking for a job as a Flutter developer, and then yeah, this startup founder found me on LinkedIn, and then yeah, we talk about Flutter, and then yeah, I got my position as a Flutter developer in the startup. So I guess like LinkedIn is something that I guess back then was very overlooked. Now everyone is on LinkedIn, so I guess there's no advantage on that. So I guess like in terms of advice, even you say, "Oh, go to LinkedIn," I think there's like you have to still be I don't know, like you have to still be different in a way because LinkedIn, there's so many people in LinkedIn. Right. So having scouted by Google is like a shocking thing to you, right? And also at the same time, like, okay, I didn't know that as a bootcamp graduate, you can work for Google. So what were the preparations before you had your technical interviews, to be specific? Because I guess like I think a lot of people are interested, like how and what is a technical interview in Google.
Okay. So when I talked to my recruiter, and it might change from time to time, right? Back then,
Yeah.
this was like 20, I think it was 2019,
Right.
2018 or 2019. Yeah, 2018,
Mm.
2019. And basically at the time, they had two tracks, I think. It was generalist and front end. So they said, oh, would you like
Mm.
to interview for a more front end role, or do you want to interview for more of a generalist role? And so I said, okay, like I feel like I'm a little more confident in my front end capabilities. So then I said I would like to do a front end interview. And so at the time, what that meant was Google had at the time had 5 rounds of technical interviews for the onsite. And if you did generalist, it would be 5 like data structures, algorithm heavy questions.
Right.
And then if you did front end, it would be 2 to 3 data structure algorithm type questions, and then 2 to 3 um, like front end type questions. So like it'd be something like, oh, build some UI that does this and that, this and that. And I can't
Mm.
go into too much detail. And also
Yeah.
like these questions change over time, so I don't want to mislead people. So then since I chose the front end at the time, I did kind of like a half preparation. Like I prepared on leak code and also used cracking the coding interview.
Yeah, yes.
That's basically like a very like popular textbook that not textbook, like a practice book that software engineers use to prepare for coding interviews. And then the other half I spent building small UIs, like kind of like I would come up with some like random like, oh, like build some like Twitter clone, or like if I wanted to quote unquote build paint on, on the browser, could I do that? Like how would I go about doing that?
Mm-hmm.
And just kind of like spend some time building UI just to like play around with like the APIs and see what I can do and see what I can't do. To be a bit more specific on the like, because that's like very general advice, right?
Yeah.
But then one of the things I specifically did that I thought was very helpful when I did the lead code and cracking the coding interview questions, I would read the question, kind of like try and guess the answer like immediately, like, oh, like given this like context, like I would use, a linked list to do this thing, and then I think it would be this time complexity. Then I'll check the answer, like, and then like not read too much into the answer, see if I'm right or wrong. If I'm right,
Mm.
then I just like, okay, great, let's move on to the next one. Don't
Okay.
waste time.
Yeah.
But then yeah, so I don't waste time trying to code out the details. If I got it wrong, I would try, because I look very quickly and try not to like see the description or like why I'm wrong. Be like,
Mm.
oh, okay, I was wrong. So then I actually bought like a little whiteboard for myself,
Mm.
and then I would basically kind of like emulate an interview environment, right? Like kind of say like, oh, like given this these constraints, like what would I think about? And I would come up with like some like sample like sample input with sample output, and then say out my thoughts out loud and write on the whiteboard as I'm like practicing. Because one of the big challenges of like the interview itself is like vocalizing your thoughts in a way that your interviewer will understand. It's kind of like going back to that
Mm.
soft skill I mentioned earlier about like being able to communicate what you're thinking. Because let's say you're stuck in like a situation where you don't really know the answer, but you have a guess, and you don't really know if the guess is on the right path or on the wrong path, or if you made some like really silly mistake that's like that you overlook but it's not really a big problem. If you are able to communicate that to your interviewer, then they might be able to be like, oh, actually, you made a small mistake, it's not a big deal, like I think you should
Ah.
fix it so you don't go down the wrong line, like go
Right.
down the wrong train of thought, right?
Yeah.
But if you stay silent and you're just trying to figure out the problem on your own, then the interviewer can't really help you, right? They don't really know what you don't know and what you do know.
Mm.
And not only can they not help you move forward, they actually don't even know how well you understand that data structure, right? Because you're not saying anything.
Yeah.
So until you have an answer or like you make some certain progress, they can't really gauge what you understand and don't understand. So that's the main reason why I would kind of like say things out to myself. And like I did a lot of this by myself, but then every now and then I would get like one of my coworkers at my bootcamp to like listen to me. Yeah, just try and find someone to listen and tell me, oh, did they understand what I was saying? Like, is there anything I could improve? Whether it's like the delivery, or am I like staying quiet too much suddenly, or am I speaking too much? Honestly, so that personally I think helped me a lot. I think the communication part is difficult because there's not a lot of opportunity to practice that in real life, right? Unless you're working, you don't really like have the opportunity to speak to someone in such technical terms unless
Right.
you're going to like deep studying and you do it in like a group setting.
Right. Oh, you start a YouTube channel and teach.
Exactly, which
Yeah.
is exactly what you're doing.
Yeah. Not getting a developer job, I don't know. Maybe in the future. I don't know. We'll see. Do you think as an instructor at a boot camp actually helped you in terms of vocalizing what you were doing? Because I guess as an instructor, right, you have to explain exactly what you're doing. Like, oh, I'm creating a button out of a button tag or something like that, right? So do you think it helped actually made the vocalization of the solutions and questions and process during the technical interview?
Oh, 100%. Because one of the important things about my job is that like I had to basically explain tough concepts to people who might not get it if you explain a certain way, right?
Yeah.
So then I had to like try and find different ways to like, either convey the same like idea, like whether it's like through drawing like different stuff out, like things out, or like using different scenarios, or like trying to find different ways to just like create analogies to the same like data structure or like the framework. That was honestly, I feel like that was like one of the best ways to prepare, like
Hmm.
and that's why they say like if you really understand the subject, you're able to teach it, right?
Yeah.
Because when you're teaching the thing, you have to come up with different ways to describe that thing. But then if you don't really understand it, there's no way you can come up with different ways to describe that concept or that data structure. So it was honestly a good practice of not only like vocalizing, but also like even better understanding the data structure as well.
Right. Yeah. So I guess like At the same time, you also have people to bounce off or actually practice to. So I guess you had like second opinions on how you've done in that like technical whiteboard session, right? And the thing is, I think one thing that I'm really curious and a lot of people are curious about is that do you use what you learned when you were preparing in a technical interview, like the data structures and algorithms in your day-to-day development?
Some of the more popular ones, right? Like you'll
Yeah.
definitely use like hash tables and like I don't think I've ever had to use a linked list specifically. You know, you've done Flutter, right? It's basically all trees. So you
Yeah.
have to really understand trees.
Do you need to invert a widget tree?
Oh, I've
Did
done that
re-
10,000 times. What do you mean?
but yeah, do you think that we should not actually judge the technical interview to the actual job that we are actually doing? Because I think there's a lot of misconception on like a lot of people should learn data structure and algorithms to get a job. And then a lot of people also complain like you study so hard in this data algorithms kind of thing, but it's not used in the job. Do you agree on that?
Oh, this one's tough because I think it's useful. So one thing that the bootcamp that I went to used to emphasize was that no, like the thing you do on the job and the interview might vary greatly.
Hmm.
And I don't want to generalize, right? Because, let's say you were working for a startup and your job is to build like a lot of front end all of a sudden. Like you have a time constraint, you have to build things, like maybe you don't care about the complexity as much. But then, maybe your job is to be a backend engineer, and then suddenly the complexity of, say the feature you're working on really like is really important and you have to use very specific data structures to meet those constraints. So then it can help, but then it might not help.
Hmm.
So the interview itself is a bit tough because it's like, oh, you have to know everything, every
Yeah.
data structure that's in this book, right? Kind
Yeah.
of thing. So we always say like, oh, it might be helpful, but it's not a guarantee that it's gonna help. And so that's why the way that the bootcamp I did always said that's why they did. Okay, so there's like two different things, right? They taught you the data structures and algorithms and how to interview and what's important for like getting the job. But
Mm-hmm.
we also like to emphasize a lot that your job is not representative of the interview experience itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's why we do projects, and then that's why we do
Mm.
group projects, because we want
Mm.
to like simulate like, oh, what's it like working on GitHub and
Yeah.
Git, and
Yeah.
then doing pull requests and getting reviews, because that's one thing that you'll never see in an interview, right? Like I mean,
No.
rarely. I haven't seen it myself, like doing a GitHub PR,
No. No.
like what a code review process is like.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But it's such an important thing, right? So it can be helpful, but then it might not be helpful. Yeah, one thing to be very mindful of is like, oh, this is a means to an end,
Mm-hmm.
but also like don't discount its like importance, because it might be helpful, but you never know. But then don't be so close-minded and think like, oh, like, this is what the job's gonna be like, because it's definitely not.
I do agree on that. Like, it is a means to an end because I guess when I work as a developer, I've never used any like data structures. I've done one recursion. I don't know if it's part of algorithmic kind of like interview question, but yeah. So I guess people always have that misconception of like data and algorithms with the job itself. Unless you're teaching as a data and algorithm instructor, then I get it. You have to know exactly what the data algorithm and is. Then after the technical interview, and I think you had the job as a Google developer because that's what you're doing right now, right? So do you had a choice in picking on what to work on when you joined Google?
Yeah, so you talk to the recruiter. If things go well, then you go into a section called team matching. Like yeah, like
Mm,
a process called team matching. Basically, what they do is like the recruiter will like talk about like some teams that are looking for engineers, and then you get a chance to talk to the hiring manager and then see if what you're looking for and what they're looking for matches. And so then I went through that process, and that's how I ended up on my team.
so back then, I assumed that Flutter wasn't released 2018. Was it released when you were joined? Like release meaning it was a stable release.
I don't think it was 1.0 yet, I think, when I
Right.
joined.
Uh, so what made you want to join Flutter? Because I believe Google has so many products. I mean, they are still supporting Angular. So, and you studied Angular in the bootcamp. So, what made you want to join Flutter?
There were two things. The person I was speaking with was like we had a really good conversation. So then, I had a feeling like, oh, if I had a good conversation with the hiring manager, then, chances are like I'll have a really good experience with the team as well, right?
Hmm.
Because they're kind of like the
Yeah.
representative of their team. And so if that call goes well, then, you know, that's probably a good indication of like your experience with the team itself. The second thing was that, like I really wanted to learn, like work on something that's like more new, more interesting. And so even though it was like a little, like it was quite scary to like do something that I was like unfamiliar with, I thought it was a very good opportunity to grow and learn, especially like, as a software engineer. This is an opportunity you might not get anywhere else. So I thought,
Mm,
why not just go for it and see how it goes.
right. Yeah, I guess new technologies is always something that people are always fascinated about. And I guess for myself, like why I chose Flutter is also along the similar lines. Like I didn't know Flutter until someone told me, hey, because I was very interested in mobile development. And then I didn't want to do iOS or Android. And then I found React Native. Ruby has a version that you can build mobile apps. Then I found Flutter, and then like okay, and yeah, Flutter was something that I knew that it had potential to be big. So I guess I betted on Flutter's success and it worked out great. But yeah, so now as a software engineer in the Flutter team, so what are like your day-to-day roles or activities that you do?
Where do I start?
Triage all the issues, put
So
them low
yes.
priority. No, lah. No, no, no.
No,
No.
no. But that is one thing, right? We have to triage as
Yep.
well. So like we
Yep.
have to see, oh, what's like one thing I used to do daily was like go through all the new issues to see like, oh, if there's anything related to something that I personally have been working mostly on, because then there might be easy wins there,
Mm.
and then there's something more serious, then we can either like triage to see how serious it is, and then escalate to whoever needs, like whoever is more familiar with whatever that thing is. Sometimes I'm spending a lot of time looking at design documents, and basically what design documents are at Google and I guess Flutter. Basically, you talk to like say the design of a new feature or like some difficult widget that has interactions with different widgets. Then you want to be able to write down the design, why you decided on that design, what designs did you decide against, and
Mm.
why you decided against them. And then then you can get peer feedback, whether it's from within the team or like for example Flutter's design docs are all open, so anyone
Yep.
can look at them on the website and like contribute and like give their own 2 cents about what they think. Sometimes the process takes a few days or a few weeks depending on how complex it is. So I'll spend some time like maybe looking at the design doc, like providing feedback or like soliciting feedback and like making adjustments to whatever I'm designing. Then I spend some time working on the feature that I wrote about in the design doc. So like for example, autocomplete, right? Like the design doc is basically finished. I mean, we added some things recently based on some feedback, but then basically one of the things we have to do is like execute on the changes now. And so like writing code for that. And then sometimes you get put on like quote unquote like on call. Like for example, the Flutter build can go red. Like basically
Mm.
someone submits a change, it fails a test either on GitHub or like internally in Google. And then you have to figure out why it failed and then just basically try and get the build green again so that you don't block every other developer build working on Flutter. So when you're on call for that, then basically your time is spent solely on that. I guess that's most of the day to day. And then other times it's like maybe being in meetings and like trying to like figure out who's working on what and like see if there are ways people can work together and don't like have two different people working on the same thing and then not have those two
Mm.
people realize that, oh, like we're working on the same thing. Let's actually just like work together and not, you know, do duplicate work.
So you have done design documents. I guess they don't teach you that in the boot camp. And design documents are really in detail. Like I've read some of the design documents for Flutter. I think the most popular one that I've read many times is the new material button, and it's like very thorough. Like you guys really put in a lot of effort inside in the design documents as well. And then you were talking about you were working on the auto complete feature. Did you like suggest like to the team, oh, I want to work on the autocomplete feature, or did someone were like, okay, pass you this feature to work on if you're interested? Is that how you got into working on the autocomplete feature?
So that one actually has a really interesting story, and I went into it a little bit in there's like a Southeast Asia Flutter Engage
Check it
extended talk,
out. Links
but
on top.
basically, yeah, check it out. There's a link over. Yeah,
Yeah.
basically the gist of it was that I was at a live event for Flutter in New York, and then basically someone came to me that I have met before, and he was like, "Hey, there's this feature that I've always wanted, like supported, and then there are third-party packages that have that feature, but then it's always missing one thing or another that I really need." And so I said, "Okay, let me file an issue for you." And like they already knew like, oh, like whether how we prioritize is based on like the thumbs up on the GitHub issue, and also like how serious the problem is, or like how serious the feature is, or how important the feature is. And so then I filed the issue, and then within 2 weeks, like it got a lot of thumbs up, like really, really quickly. So then we were thinking, oh yeah, I guess a lot of people do want this feature. After it got really popular, then the team talked about, okay, I think we should like work on this. And since I like found the issue, then they said, oh, you should work on it. And then also they got Justin to work on it, and he's one of my teammates, and he is like I guess our expert in text input, right? So then they said, oh, this is perfect for him. So that's basically how they got the two of us working on that, I think.
Right. So I guess like you guys have actually like talked to the customers or the users of the Flutter framework, right? And then you decide what kind of features to actually focus on, because I think there's a lot of people who has a lot of feature requests inside the Flutter GitHub repository, including myself. I think how you prioritize is also like looking at how many people actually agree. Like for example, the autocomplete feature is, if that's a feature that is actually what people want, because I guess Flutter was like, I think like Flutter is like a from scratch kind of like framework, like it's not like built from like what has already have built, but like really from scratch, because I guess Flutter for you guys is like a canvas. You can build from scratch literally anything. Yeah, like autocomplete wasn't like the main feature about Flutter, but yeah, you've made it happen. Do you think like is it like stable, and how do you feel when you've managed to actually finish that feature, and how long did it actually take to finish that feature?
It's an embarrassing answer to the question because I actually haven't written any code for it yet. But then Justin has written most of the code. I mean, all of the
Right.
code, honestly. Basically, it started in, let's see, 2019 December. So it's been a year and 4 months, a year, 3 months from when the issue was filed. And then we started work on it, I think, was it July or August of last year? I think, I'm not really sure. I'm like just like pulling these like dates kind of like from memory, and it's not very clear. But the thing is, like, it's one of the things we're working on top of other things that we're working on. So like we don't 100% dedicate the time to just like working on one thing. Like there are other
Ah.
issues or bugs that come up that we have to take priority over. It's been a year and 3 months, 4 months, but then we started work on it 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 8, 9 months ago, and then like working on that in parallel with other things, like it's taken this long. For example, like the reason I have written code on autocomplete was because I was working on state restoration for a lot of the time. And so now I'm going back to it because I'm almost done with state restoration. Then I'm adding on to the features that we think are like the next things that we need to prioritize for autocomplete.
So with that, what are the skills that you didn't expect that to learn in Google as a software engineer? I mean, one of it, I guess, it was design document. Like, I think for most small companies, I think they don't have the time or like priority to put a design document up for a feature, because I think features first, don't care about the design document. So, what are other skills that you have learned as a software engineer in Google that you didn't expect to learn?
So one thing that's very interesting, right? Because you mentioned, like for some startups, like, oh, it's like the feature first. Like it
Yeah.
doesn't really matter what it looks like in the back end as long as
Yeah.
it satisfies some like constraint, right? But then on the Flutter team, one thing I realized is that our API is kind of the product, right?
Yes.
So let's say I made a parameter and I like made a feature that toggles something like a true false value, right? And then we push it out, it's stable and everything. And then it turns out that it's not a very good feature.
Oh.
So like it's not useful, or like there's a bug, like a lot of bugs with it or something like that, right? Um, the problem is it's very hard to take back that feature because
Hmm.
people use it in their code, right? You can't just remove it because it's a breaking change. So that's why we have design docs and we take a lot longer with like the features, at least on the Flutter team.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I never realized was so important, because once you make a, like, not say a mistake, but there's an oversight with like the API. It's really hard to take back. Like you have to do a migration guide. Is the migration hard? Maybe it's something that's not easy to migrate. Like how do we go about, you know, maybe like having to deprecate the parameter or the feature if we have to, and then how do we tell users to do it in an easy way? Because if it's too breaking and it's not easy to migrate, then we might not be able to actually get rid of it. We might just have to say this is not what we recommend, but if you're already using it, then you have, like, there's no other choice. We just leave it there. I think that's one thing I found that was very interesting that I never thought about a lot before. So now when I introduce a new API or like review code that introduces a new API, I always think twice. Like, is this very helpful? If it is like, yeah, and just like try and reason out, is this necessary? Can we do this? Can we do this already with existing APIs? And if
Hmm.
we can, like, why don't we just like write docs that explain how to do it with the other API instead?
Hmm. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
one thing we talk about is like I think, is it called the API? Oh my gosh, what is it called? Basically, we try to keep the APIs small, right? Because if there's too many
Hmm.
parameters and you look at a widget with like 50 parameters, you might just be like, oh my gosh, like how do I
Why?
even know what I'm trying to do with these?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Why?
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
definitely a really important thing. Yeah,
Right.
making sure to keep the API small and clean, but then
Mm.
also like making sure it's useful.
Basically, what you shared with us is that due to Flutter success, a lot of people are using the Flutter SDK, and then with any small changes, it actually impacts a lot of people. So I guess you did not know how much power you have in terms of like improving, or like, yeah, I guess I mean, we are all humans. We learn, we grow, we make mistakes. We sometimes overlook certain things that we might think might be small but might be very big for like a lot of people. So I guess like honestly, I think if Flutter wasn't that successful, not trying to say Flutter isn't lah, but like if Flutter's framework wasn't impacting a lot of people, you might not have the same perspective, in my opinion now. But like look at Flutter success, like small changes, and like a lot of people complaining a lot of things of the new changes that Flutter tries to bring to solve certain use cases. Like for example, I think I can speak on the behalf of certain Flutter people. It's like Navigator 2.0 or the new material buttons. Yeah, thinking twice on the features that you want to bring towards the SDK and APIs is something that I think not many people have the privilege to be in, or might not even think about it, because like as developers, you just see code, right? We don't really see the impact that we do until you see like, oh shit, okay, yeah, that's true. Yeah, so you're doing state restoration and also autocomplete at the same time, as well as looking through the different issues. So what is like one thing that you think we people who use the Flutter framework can do better, in terms of like, maybe should we put very specific issues? Like I understand that when putting issues, we tend to just put the issues without putting like a reproducible simple project, that kind of thing. I understand, because sometimes I really don't have the time to do that. Or like, what are the things that we who use the Flutter framework can improve? Because as you guys have so many things on your plate. So I yeah, what are things that you would recommend us to do if we were to find an issue or a bug? Yeah.
So if you find an issue or bug, definitely try and file it with as much information as possible, right? Because sometimes it's really tough to reproduce. And now that we support so many platforms, right? It might be a very platform specific bug, because then it becomes time that we have to spend like trying to figure out, oh, is this a bug? If it's an issue with the framework, then it provides us with a roadmap of like, oh, where should we look? Who should we get to look at it? Because it's a lot easier to like pinpoint how can we fix the problem. On the flip side of things, if it's a problem with your setup, then we can provide suggestions for how do we fix that problem with your setup. And also maybe the problem with your setup is a result of something that could be done better, right? Like something you did with the Flutter installation was not very smooth. So you kind of like jam it to work in your on your machine. It's worked up to that point, and then suddenly it stopped working. Maybe you just follow instructions you saw on the website, but then maybe we could have updated the website to say something different or like clarify a certain thing so you don't run into the same problem again. So I would definitely say, yeah, for sure, putting in more information on GitHub issues, like whether it's reproducible code or like what platform did you run it on, like as in like what are you what machine are you developing on, and what machine you are deploying your code on. Like, are you developing on a Mac OS, and then are you running into the bug on an Android phone or an iOS phone, or maybe just both, like you've tried both and then you realize it's both. That's usually very useful. So for example, another useful thing is like I do a lot of the internationalization work as well. So like if you run into an internationalization bug, like is your phone's locale like a specific locale? Like what locale is it? When you run into
Right.
that bug, are you using this locale? What is your list of locales? What is the number one because there are ways to select which ones take priority, right? Which locales take priority on your phone and on the Flutter app. So like, what does that look like so that I can reproduce the issue and see, is there something we could do better, or is there really a bug in the framework itself?
Yeah, so I guess like stressing on the part of like what kind of machines you're running your code on, I think it's also very important, because like certain machines has like outdated kind of like operating system, because some people just don't want to update their systems for whatever reason. At the same time, like now you guys are supporting a lot of or almost all of the platforms. So now you have like Mac OS, and then now I guess like due to Flutter's vision of being like the framework to rule them all. Kidding. I mean the framework to what do you call that? Build beautiful designs for every platform. I think now there are more different issues, I would say, because people will have bugs at maybe in Linux or even in Windows when they create a Windows desktop. So I do agree, because sometimes people just put issues and then that's it. This thing cannot work. That's like what? I totally understand, because sometimes I file issues and then if I got nothing to do, I just look through the issues. I'm like, these people just yeah. But I mean I do have to comment on you guys. You guys really reply very fast, which is great. Because I think I've never filed enough issues to know how fast someone replies to an issue, but you guys do it really fast. At the same time, for those who wants to contribute to Flutter, right? Because there are two things that someone can do in the Flutter framework in terms of like solving or raising issues. First is raising issues, so you file an issue. Second is that you do pull requests. So how like is it better to file issues, or is it better if you know how to solve the issue to do a pull request?
I mean, we certainly welcome both. I think both are really helpful. But if you do decide to file a pull request, I think that there's a added challenge of like kind of knowing a couple of things, right? Do you understand how to work with GitHub? Do you understand like the specific not saying is it community guidelines? I guess there's like contributing guidelines. Like how do we like what's our style guide? Yeah, the style guide is a big thing. And then like whether or not you contribute tests, like what do tests look like? Because we don't take any pull requests that change code without adding tests, because then if you don't add a test and you make a change, that change could easily be reverted by some other developer, right? Without
Yep.
anyone realizing, because there's no test to fail. Like pull requests are really great because like it's very like it makes it a lot easier to solve the problem that you're trying to solve. But it has to be of a certain level of like skill and quality, right? Because
Right.
let's say you submit a PR with a change without a test, and then what most people would do is say like, oh, could you like submit a test with a change, because there's no way to basically check for regressions, and we will not take a pull request without a test unless there's like some rare circumstance that doesn't allow for it. So then like learning how to write a test, learning to work with GitHub, because sometimes like weird things happen with Git and like version control, and then it becomes a process of us trying to debug like what happened with the with the
Yeah.
Git history or like some
Yeah.
weird thing that happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not trying to discourage anyone because like we want like we know everyone's like at a different level at a different pace, and people might just want to contribute as like practice, right? And this is like a cool way to like learn how to contribute not only to open source but also like to learn how to program. But like going through like the documentation, right? Like this is a bit going back to like the bootcamp stuff, but like there's a readme for there's a readme no there's a wiki, sorry, for contributing.
Mm.
Then you can look at the Dart docs, you can look at the Flutter docs. Their code base is there, right? So you can look at how other Flutter tests are written for similar things. Like let's say you're working on a drop down button parameter, you can look at the other parameters for the drop down itself, and then go to the drop down button test file, and then look at
Mm.
when I add a parameter like similar to this one, what does that test look like? And then
Right.
you can kind of like mirror and see why they're testing what they're testing. And maybe it might be in a different file too, right? Like, so for example, let's say I'm trying to think of a more real life example.
Add
Nothing's coming
missing
to me right now. But
documentation.
add missing. Well, that's no, that because documentation usually doesn't cost need you to write tests. I'm trying to think of a way to
Oh,
describe
okay. Right test. Oh, sorry,
how's
sorry.
what's a good way to write test. Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
like
So
I don't know.
okay,
Like
okay, cool.
uh,
Outline button. Let's say there's an outline button parameter. Say like I'll make something up like hover. Oh, wait, hover color is a real thing. Like let's say there's a hover color for outline button, but there
mm,
isn't one for a material button. Then
mm,
chances are there's already a test for hover color for outline button,
right.
but not material button. So then you can use that test as kind of like a guideline for, oh, how do I test for this thing? So
Right.
like maybe a different widget might
Mm,
have a similar test that you can kind of
mm,
repurpose for your own needs. And so
right.
like maybe starting with doing that first, then we have somewhere we can start, right? Like when people code review you, whether it's the Flutter team or like other contributors to Flutter, they have somewhere to start, and then the code review process is a lot smoother.
Yeah, so having, I guess, some sort of example that's very similar to the pull request and feature that you're trying to solve would help. Because I guess, like, I do agree that as a framework and then as a company, you guys have certain standards in terms of contributing code. And I think you guys are nice enough to, like, I think I've read an article about how to contribute to the Flutter GitHub repository, and like the Dart FMT is supposedly need to be switched on or something like that, because I think if you were to have your own formatter on your own IDE, it actually changes the whole like file, and then when you do a pull request, you see that the whole file is actually changed, but you actually change only one single code. So like in like these kind of things are some things that people might not think that's important, but it's actually very important in terms of like having a certain format and standard. Yeah. So I guess this will be the last.
Exactly. So actually,
Yeah. Sorry. I
oh,
continue.
sorry.
So
I was gonna say
continue.
this is okay. So I was gonna say that's actually an issue I ran into the first time because I didn't realize that the rules for Dart format and the style guide are not the same.
Yeah.
So then it basically, like you said, reformatted the whole file, and then I had to revert all the changes, change the thing that I was trying to change again, and then I reviewed the style guide again to make sure I knew exactly what I was doing before I, asked my reviewer to review again.
Yeah, it's a good lesson to learn, but at the same time, like it's still something that I would say some people might or might not want to do, because like they might be afraid of like doing pull requests, like, oh, I'm not good enough to do pull requests. I have to, like for me, like if you really want to do pull requests, just look at, because I believe Flutter has a lot of widgets that I still don't know that exist. There are definitely documentations that can be improved or can be added as well. So like for those people who want to contribute to Flutter, right, you can definitely do that. And I guess the most simplest thing is that I sometimes when I see documentation, right, there are spelling errors, typos. So like I think that's the best way to actually like file a pull request, because like you don't have to have coding skills. You just need English language, and that's about it. Okay, so I guess this will be the last question. So you've been with the Flutter team, I think, for 2 years, right? Before it was stable and currently, how was it different from when you worked Flutter back then and now? What is like the biggest thing that changed with the Flutter framework or the Flutter team or the Flutter community that stands out when you started working with Flutter and currently?
I would say not much has changed. I think the biggest thing was that the emphasis on making breaking changes and like how we communicate that, right? Because like you mentioned,
Mm,
because Flutter is getting more and more popular, and like you mentioned, like everything that we do to the framework impacts everyone. I mean,
Yeah.
well, it depends, right? Like, yeah, but
Yeah.
the idea is that the change you're making can impact everyone. So then, just being very particular about, oh, how do we introduce new features and fixes without introducing a unwanted breaking change? I think that becomes more and more important as we like move forward and progress.
I guess Flutter has a lot of things. I guess in a roadmap, it's inside the Flutter repository, and I think I believe like Flutter is still in the beginning stage of being a very I would say large framework because. The Flutter Engage events we released that Flutter framework supports all the platforms, and I think there's a lot more help needed for like platforms like Linux and like Windows and Mac OS and many more. But yeah, so I guess like yeah, just try your best to do some pull requests and or changes or even issues so that the Flutter team can actually see and prioritize which one to be worked on because it's I mean open source you literally can see what they are doing. Yeah, so yeah, I think that's about it for the questions. Thank you for joining in this virtual interview. So do you have anything else to tell to the people who are using Flutter? Any like advice? Even it doesn't have to be Flutter developers, but any advice? I think for both of us, I think any advice for anyone who is venturing into tech, because both of us weren't from technical backgrounds, right? So any advice for those who are now doing self-taught or even going through a boot camp?
Well, I guess this is very specific to me, but I find that I work well with like studying in groups, try and find a group of people to study with, especially for the same thing. Like when you're learning a new language or learning a new framework, having someone to like, like talk to and like learn, not just like learning, right? But then also like kind of like throw your ideas around, right? Because maybe, like I said before, you could misunderstand a concept and not realize it until you mention it to someone else. So even if it's not like an in-person thing, like for example with the Flutter, I think there's like a Flutter Discord. I forget what it's
Mm,
called, but like for example, you could put questions up there, and like community members are generally very active, and they might be able to answer your question. And you might learn something new. They might like give you a little bit more than what you asked for, right? I think that was very, like that would be super helpful, and also like not being afraid to just like try something new because with the internet and like all the different pieces of free content, right? You can basically learn JavaScript on your own. There are a lot of like really cool courses out there. I think one I saw that was pretty cool is called like Grasshopper. And then even like for simple things, not simple things, like for interesting concepts like using Flexbox in JavaScript, I think there's like really cool content out there that's free as well. And they made like they get like there are a lot of like games like
yeah.
that gamify like learning a specific concept. Yeah. So like not being afraid to just like be curious and like just try things out. Like you might like just even doing something random that's not related to the main, let's say you're learning JavaScript, like just like looking at Dart, like seeing, oh, what's different? Like, do I like
Mm,
this language? Why do I not like this language? What was hard for me? What was easy for me?
right.
I think that's like really, I think that's like really helpful because you start seeing like, oh, like this field is very, very complex and really, really expensive. There's like so much you can learn. Find like little opportunities to like see how you can expand your horizons a little bit.
Joining a group, I mean, now in this pandemic, you might be able to. I mean, in Singapore, we are able to hold events and like be in groups of 8. I don't know about like other. Like, how about Taiwan? Is it how are you guys able to like be in groups, or do you guys still in quarantine or whatnot?
No, so Taiwan's pretty open. I think anyone like we can go out and do things freely, but we need to wear a mask. And then there's like there are rules about like distancing a certain amount, but generally it's pretty free. But then back to the like yeah, I like that was in a non-COVID context. But in a
Yeah.
COVID context, maybe find groups to like have like an online, not meetup, but like small like study sessions. Maybe you guys are just like doing your own self study, but then you guys have each other on screen so that you can ask each other questions when you come about them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, so I guess a lot of like virtual groups out there. I think one there is this Flutter buddies. If you guys don't know, Flutter Buddies is also another Discord like Flutter group. They're very active, so I highly recommend you that. There is an official Flutter Discord group, but I guess they do yeah. There's another one. I think the Reddit Flutter group as well. That's also pretty active. So there's a lot of groups out there that you can join and ask questions. I guess a lot of people always look for people who is able to answer their questions. Virtually, I think you guys are able to join groups as well. Thank you so much, Shihao, for joining in this interview.